Understand that you're fighting against the waves and that tide will always beat man. So instead of going out there and just wearing yourself out and burning out eventually, trying to make anything happen, what if you took a lighter approach? You know, every founder, every entrepreneur always talks about, oh, when I get to this stage, I'm gonna, have lunch with my kids twice a week, and I'm gonna pick them up from school, and I'm gonna start playing tennis, and you're gonna do always in the future. I will do something. And what if you took that now? What if you did that now?
There's a lot of podcasts out there, but only one practical optimist, and this is it. We're here to shine a light on the incredible leaders that live next door to you and me. And today's guest is a business leader who happens to live about 6,000 miles south of me in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Jonathan Young is the CEO and founder of Vertico, and he'll be talking to us today about everything from unicorns to crocodiles. Believe it or not, he's a practicing Catholic and a Buddhist, having grown up in a truly multicultural household. With clients across the high-flying tech space, you'll hear Jonathan's perspective on building more diverse companies, as well as his take on the power of having different types of mentors at different times in your life. I recently had a chance to spend time with Jonathan, his wife Vivian, and their two amazing kids. And I can tell you firsthand, they're all about living life as a marathon, not a sprint. I'm your host, Ken Schmidt, founder and CEO of Turning Point Executive Search and author of The Practical Optimist. And today's discussion is all about gratitude and curiosity. It's time for Jonathan Young to take us through the intersection of leadership and life. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us today on the podcast. I'm really excited to be talking to you from all the way down in South America in Brazil. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Ken. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great. So you and I know each other through Talentor, which is a global executive search firm kind of organization. And we've got, about 34, 35 different countries around the world. So it's been really cool to kind of hear what's happening in your world down south, and given your experience here in the US also, and working and living over in the UK for a while, you truly have a global background, to say the least.
Yeah, I think it was one of those by chance and then by design, right? So I was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, but I sound like this. Everybody says you sound like somebody from CNN, right? The CNN accent. So I went to American school since I was 3 years old, but my dad is born in Brazil, but of Chinese descent, and mom is from Bangkok, Thailand. So the language they spoke in common was English. So I grew up speaking English, and then attended college in the US, and then worked there and then the UK for a number of years before coming back to Brazil.
Wow, what an amazing trip and journey you've had, for sure. And I'm sure you can probably adapt depending upon who it is you're talking to, based on language, based on culture, based on just different customs as well. You've kind of been there and done that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know we have a lot of great stuff to talk about today also, but I want to kind of start with your current role, right? So you've been running this company now for 10 years, Vertico. And I'd love for our listeners to kind of hear what you're all about, and really kind of the focus that you have down there in South America.
So Vertical founded the firm 10 years ago, as you said. We're an executive search firm. We're focused on the theme tech/digital. So about most of our clients are startups, scale-ups, and a lot of the local unicorns. But we also do a lot of work with enterprise clients, especially in terms of their digital initiatives. So that's kind of the space that we've carved out for ourselves.
Interesting. Okay, great. And I know I'm curious. I know in the U.S. here, a unicorn is described as a company that's still privately held with $1 billion plus valuation, right? Is it the same definition down there?
Yeah, same. 1 billion USD is kind of the mark. Yeah.
Okay, very good. And so how did you decide to start working with that population? I mean, one of the amazing things about being in the executive search world is that there's not one formula, not just one way to do it. You can work across a variety of industries, variety of functions, company sizes, all kinds of formulas that work. But how did you decide to go after the startup and early stage market?
I would have liked to say, Ken, I thought there was a lot of opportunity and therefore I invested in it, but I think it's by chance. My first job out of college was with an executive search firm called J. Robert Scott, and all of their work was with venture and private equity-backed businesses, and the bulk of that was tech. So it was kind of what I knew how to do. It was the network I had when I founded the firm. But I've always really believed in executive search firms, especially us, right? More startups being focused on a specific market niche and not generalist, because I think you bring a lot more to the table when you know a given industry and you don't have to learn the industry from the ground up.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I agree. And like you said, there's there are generalists out there that do a fine job, but I'm the same way. I've always preferred having a particular area of focus. For us, it's more on the functional side as opposed to industry. But working across a variety of companies, you learn a lot about leadership, and that there's not just one way to lead an organization or a team, right? There's different ways to get to that ideal end result. And learning about that and seeing the different pathways, I think is great. You kind of have to be a lifelong learner, I think, to be in the executive search business for sure.
Sure. I think that the generalist, you have to be very strong in process, and that can get you quickly on board. But being a specialist, I think it's also a lot easier from a marketing perspective. People know where to place you.
Exactly. Now, so I know you grew up obviously with a pretty international family, and both your parents have very different backgrounds or kind of upbringing. Was one of your goals to develop a firm where you could leverage that international experience that you have?
Not really. I don't think I ever thought about it that way. But naturally, when I came back to Brazil, my early clients were US or European technology companies that were setting up shop here. So it happened by chance, but I don't know. I never really thought of it that way. Brazil is a country of 250 million people, 220 million people, I should say. So it's a very big local market, and we're the biggest country in South America. We do a lot of business with with neighbors, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, etc. So not purposely, but it's a lot of fun, and like you and I know each other through talent or a good group of people. It's nice to see differences, but it's also really fun to see how much we have in common.
Yeah, exactly. I know we were talking offline about kind of the differences between the whole hybrid remote work situation versus being in the office. And, I know in the US, things are kind of starting to settle into a bit of a groove where, probably around 50, 60% of clients, our companies are going to have some kind of hybrid approach. You'll always have those that are fully remote and those that are fully in office, just based on the nature of their business. But I'm curious how that's evolved for you. I think you had mentioned about that your mindset has changed a little bit over the last couple of years, also going through this.
I think it depends a lot on who you have on your team. So I think in the early days of the firm, we always had this philosophy of, instead of having the candidate come to our offices and interview with us here, it would just be a lot faster and a lot better candidate experience if we went to them. So I had a team that was, they lived wherever they lived, and we'd meet in the office a couple of days a week. This is all pre-pandemic. And then the other days you just interview or you go to client meetings, and you work primarily out of home. And then we have the pandemic where everything goes remote, obviously. And then, now as we're coming out of it, I think everybody's just trying to figure out what the right formula or what the right balance is. But the problem is that it's going to change again, right? So I think that you always have to have this very flexible mind frame.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, it's one thing we've learned over the last several years is nothing is set in stone. Even things that you think are just tried and true that will never ever change, it up and changes on you, right? That's as they say, life is what happens when you're making plans. So you got to be ready for that flexibility there.
That's right.
Tell us about your upbringing, right? So your mom and dad, one was Catholic and one was Buddhist, and I'm sure that was a very interesting upbringing and experience for you. That's probably shaped, kind of who you are today.
Yeah, so it sounds complicated, but like as an adult now, it starts to make a lot of sense to me. So mom's from Bangkok, Thailand. She's a Buddhist. Dad was born here in Brazil. My family's Chinese, but they've been Catholic for quite a few generations now, and both of them quite religious. So when we were, I have two siblings. So when the three of us were growing up, our parents decided that they were not going to fight over religion, but they would have us grow up in both religions. So I'm a baptized Catholic who goes to church every Sunday. But I also go to temple, and every morning I light up incense and I pray to Buddha, and he has a little tea that I put by. So all these traditions are very much ingrained. For my parents, it didn't matter which religion you chose, as long as you chose to be religious. That was always more important to them. And living in Brazil, it's just easier in a way to identify as a Catholic. So that went fine until my son was born, and that day things just changed. I found myself with the newborn at home. In the morning, I do gratitude. I'd be grateful to Buddha, and I put a little tea and light incense. And at night, I'm on my knees talking to Jesus. And it sounds weird, but it really works for me because I take a lot of Buddhism has a lot of gratitude associated to it, right? And Christianity, I mean, we pray, we ask for things. And the combination of asking and being grateful, it just works really well for me. And both my kids today, they claim they're Catholic Buddhists.
That's fascinating. Well, I think you need to write a book yourself and start a podcast just about that. That sounds.
I'll do a podcast, The Catholic Buddhist.
Exactly right. I think it's fantastic. Right. Exactly. I mean, who would have thought those things could come together and be so harmonious, right? And obviously, you've done a great job of making that work and maintaining that balance in your lives as well. But I like the way that you framed it. One is all about gratitude. One is about asking for things, right? Whatever it might be, and then being able to put those together into a workable life situation is amazing. So kudos to you for that.
And my mom always told me that, at the end, everybody's trying to get to heaven or trying to get to, somewhere else, somewhere good. And it's just whether you choose to, what mode of transportation you prefer. You can take the train. She's like, I'm a Buddhist. I take the airplane. It's way faster, direct flight. Your dad, he's a Catholic. He walks. He's like, guilt. He's just like walking. So he'll get there, but it's going to take him a little bit longer. So she's like, you do whatever you want to do. I'm just telling you, there's an easier path.
So let's kind of chat a little bit, if you would, Jonathan, about kind of your schooling and kind of your experience becoming an entrepreneur. So you're born in Brazil, then you're obviously there for most of your adolescence, and then you decide to come to college and school here in the U.S. How did that come to pass?
So my dad's side of the family, a lot of them were U.S. educated. So like a lot of Asian immigrant families, it sounds a little cliche kind of saying this, but education is that one thing that nobody can take away from you, right? So my family lived in China, and they had a factory there. And then when after the Civil War and the communists take over, the factory is no longer theirs, right? So they find themselves without a home and without a way of so they end up emigrating. So it's one of those things that if you're able to give your kids the best education out there, it's something that's always going to stay with them, independent of whether a government changes or where you find yourself at home. So educated in the U.S., I was very impacted by the father of a friend of mine who was an executive search consultant. So I chose human resources as a degree, even though I didn't know too much about what all of that was about. And so I'm a human resources and finance major out of Boston College.
And so how did you choose Boston College? Was there folks that you knew that were at that school, or is that where a lot of folks went to?
Mom and dad went to BC, and that's where they met.
Great. Okay. So there's some family history there.
Growing up, they used to take us on campus to the BC's campus quite a bit. So it was cool. It felt, even though I was going to go very far away from home, it felt like there was still a part of home that I could relate to.
That's interesting. That's great. And I think you said that when we talked offline that the seeds were sown pretty early on that you wanted to get into kind of HR and recruiting from an earlier experience in grade school, correct?
Yeah, I think I was about 10, and this friend that I mentioned, his father comes to school to give a talk about careers. And he at the time was an executive search guy running Korn Ferry in Latin America. And he's just very charismatic. His talk blew my mind. And then, because no one ever told me that they would pay you to ask questions for a living, right? So that was really cool. And I'm a big soccer fan, but I love the off season. That's when the teams are trading, hiring players for the next season. And when I found out there was a job that would let you do that for companies, I figured that, I should probably check this out further. So it's been a really good fit. I've never done anything else in my career other than executive search, and I love it. I have a lot of fun.
I wonder if there's anybody else from that class of yours that had such an impact from that speaker, right? I'm sure you're probably the only person that came away from that and actually followed a career based on your dad's your friend's dad from Korn Ferry coming to talk. That's awesome.
So every time the local schools ask for volunteers for career day, I always sign up. I think it's, who knows, right? It's just one of those things where you can plant a seed in somebody's head, and that person goes on to build a career, build a business, employ other people. I think it's kind of a cool thing.
No, I agree completely. I'm actually a volunteer for the last 11 years. I've been a volunteer at Junior Achievement here in San Diego, one of the local high schools, for exactly that reason. Also, it's part of their entrepreneurial program. And these kids, we have 30, 40 kids in a class, and they all have to actually build a company, not just theoretical on paper, what if, but they literally have to actually make the product or service, go out and get some investors. They have to sell the product or service, make some revenue, and then write a whole business plan around it. So same kind of thing. You just never know how you can have an impact on someone longer term, even by just planting a couple of seeds early on in their education. That's great.
Yeah, and it's important to in a way, it's just a give back as well, right?
Very true, very true. And speaking of that, so did you have any I guess formal or informal mentors along the way as you were kind of building up your career in search?
It's one of those things, right? When we say mentor, everybody kind of imagines, like a guru or like a Yoda figure if you're into Star Wars. And in my experience, I think that you have a number of different mentors at different phases of your life and regarding different themes, right? So I remember at one point I was just putting in a lot of hours at work, and I met this guy and we became friends. And he told me his life story where he was going to go on to be CEO of a big multinational here in Brazil. And he decided that wasn't really what he truly wanted. And that what he wanted instead was to work half days and be around his kids a lot. And, he's very much into pottery. And he said, look, I'm definitely not as wealthy as I would have been, but I'm definitely happier, and I think I'm going to live a lot longer because of it, right? So that was, he was an important mentor figure for that episode of my life, where I was kind of dealing with what's the proper work-life balance. And then now with everything that's gone on in the tech world, less liquidity, a lot of tech companies hiring significantly less, if hiring at all. I had lunch with another person today who was just telling me about how he's approaching all of this. And he goes, look, if you continue in this winter, just going out there and doing the automatic, which is just fighting for your life and going crazy, and just regained all of your energy. And then when the market starts to come back, then you're rested and you're ready to go. So, it's in a weird way, like I get a lot of this from a lot of people at different moments.
That's amazing. Well, I love that story. And I think, and it's all about whether it's an actual guru or whether it's a formal mentor or it's something more informal, it's all about surrounding yourself with people that are willing to share those insights with you and that are willing to be vulnerable and transparent and say, hey, you know what, this might be somewhat, counterintuitive or contrarian, but here's what I suggest. And here's what's worked for me. Right. It may or may not work for you, but think about the here and now versus, when I get to X, Y, Z, then I will do A, B, C. Right. Instead, it's, let's do it now. Don't wait, because A, that time may never come. And B, once you get to that time, you're going to find some other way to fill, and occupy your days. So do it now. Don't wait. I love that approach. It's a great kind of a life philosophy.
I think, yeah, for sure. But I think trying to find one guru, it's kind of like looking for a silver bullet, right? It would be extremely convenient, but I don't know. I think it's significantly more complex than that.
No, I agree completely. And I have different people in my life also that have been, quote unquote mentors or confidants at different stages of my life also. And I get something about, raising a family from one person, and something about, having a more diverse workforce from somebody else. And then, how do you manage a younger team? I mean, so you have people around you, to my point before, that can all contribute in different ways, and being open to that feedback and being open to that enlightenment or insight is really important. So you said earlier about, when your son was born, it kind of changed your view on the religious balance, right? For sure. Did your kids being born change your approach to running a business, or to even to your goals, whether they were revenue or employee size or those kinds of things?
So before my kids were born, I'd lose sleep over a lot of things. whether it was a client that might not be very happy, or competition giving me a hard time, or, team, etc. And then I think after you become a parent, the only thing you end up losing sleep over is if your kid is not well, whether that be emotionally or physically, right? So oddly, I find myself sleeping better as a parent than before I was a parent.
I love that. No, that's great. And I agree completely. I used to always say that, even in the earlier days when I started my company, and it's been 16 years now, but, the kids were really young and I'd have just a really shitty day. I'm like, oh, God, this just sucks. And, I made mistakes along the way, or I did things the right way, but it still went sideways for reasons outside of my control. But you come home and your kids don't care what title's on your business card. Your kids don't care how many people you're managing. They don't care about any of that. They just want to hang out and play and build a fort and, make lunch together and have dessert or whatever it is. And so for me, it was a great leveling of, what was important, and the priorities out there as well. It was a huge, I think, bonus for me to have young kids around when I first started the company.
Yeah. And I remember when my daughter was born, we were at the hospital at the maternity, and I looked at her and I thought about her, and I thought about the job market, and I was thinking, like, I just looked at it and I kind of, so one of the themes that we have here at Vertical is that we have a diversity and inclusion practice, and that was very much inspired by that moment at the maternity, because I'm looking at my daughter thinking, in 18 years time she's going to get into the workforce as a woman, one. Number two, as a person of Asian descent, will she have equal opportunities? And, the answer, if you're, not being naive, is no, she's not going to have equal opportunities. And then I think to myself, me as someone who works kind of broadly speaking, with jobs, how can I make a difference here? So that really inspired me to not only look at my own team, but help our clients as well with, having more diverse, more balanced, just richer teams.
I really commend you on that as well. I mean, for a company your size and my size, it'd be easy to say, yeah, diversity or lack of diversity is an issue, but what can I really do about it? Right. I've got 8, 10, 15, 30, 40 employees. Can I really make an impact? And it's easy. I think it would be easy to ignore it and kind of move on. But, really kudos to you and your team for not only acknowledging it, but then doing something about it and saying, we want to make a difference, and we want to show our clients, no matter what size they happen to be or what, space they're in, that diversity and inclusion is really important. And if you don't start now on the smaller side, it'll never permeate the larger companies.
Yeah, and because, Ken, you and I, we're in the same career, we can impact our clients, right? So even though our firms might be small to mid-sized, we're dealing with a lot of large organizations, and we're dealing with leadership level roles. So if we can make a difference there, I think a lot of it kind of carries out quite quickly.
And now a word from our sponsor. Why is it so damn hard to fill this position? There just isn't any good talent out there. Last week, I was talking to the CEO, CMO, and head of HR at a consumer products company, and they literally said these same words to me. In fact, they told me they had received over 800 resumes for a recent e-commerce position. And do you know how many candidates they had interviewed from that bunch? Exactly 9. That's a 1% success rate. Is that insane or what? I told them they weren't alone. In fact, we've been hearing this from many clients over the last year, and it's been really frustrating for a lot of leaders. So if you're dreading the sight of yet another job posting and the endless game of sifting through hundreds of unqualified resumes, maybe it's time to give us a call. Even if you don't end up hiring an outside search firm, we're always happy to be a sounding board and a resource, offering guidance and insights to help enhance your hiring process and hopefully avoid the relentless resume race. Turning Point Executive Search, connecting people, inspiring performance. As you know, the title of this podcast is The Practical Optimist, and I kind of pull those two things from my dad being optimistic, my mom being very practical, and there's certainly some crossover without question. But I like to always, talk to our guests about, a phrase or a couple of words or descriptors that they kind of live by in their life. Does anything come to mind for you in terms of describing yourself?
So I'm gonna steal a little bit from your book, Ken. I think that from my mom, definitely the grateful side. It has to do obviously with religion and upbringing, but my mom is a genuinely happy person. And a lot of happiness comes from the fact that she's extremely grateful for everything she has. And even when something bad happens, she kind of takes that as an opportunity to learn and to grow. She doesn't look at it as something bad. She looks at it as like, hey, I guess it's time for me to be uncomfortable a little bit, and I'm going to be grateful for that. And so I think grateful is definitely one of them. The other one is curious. And I one of the great things of our job, Ken, is that we can ask people a ton of questions and they're willing to talk to us, and they give us like a pocket version of everything they've learned over the past 20 years. And, so I go home and I tell my wife a lot of days, like, I had this amazing conversation today. And she goes, oh, you mean an interview? I go, no, I had this amazing conversation. I just learned so much about this or that. So I'm very, very grateful and very curious.
I love that. That's a great combination. And I agree. I think I one of the reasons I'm in this industry, as long as I am as well, like yourself, is because we get to ask questions that just, again, being that lifelong learner and hearing people's stories and their backgrounds and experiences and how it's shaped who they are today and why they think the way that they think. It's just, it's really fascinating. And I think one of the reasons I think that we have this podcast is for that reason, to be able to shine the spotlight, right, and highlight people that maybe you wouldn't otherwise talk to or know much about just passing them on the street, but you realize, God, everybody out there has a really interesting story. And some folks are better at telling it than others. Certainly, one of the things that I struggle with is that being in the search business, I'm so used to asking questions, to your point. I'm so used to finding out information about other people. When people ask me questions, I feel uncomfortable at times, which is kind of a strange, it doesn't make much sense. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm so used to asking them and inquiring about them that when someone inquires about me, I feel like, I shouldn't be able to have the microphone. It should be up to them, not to me. So that's something I kind of struggle with. So let's talk about, so let's fast forward, right? So you come to the US, you go to school at Boston College to keep the alma mater support alive, right, for your parents. Then you go, right? Then you go back to Brazil. So at that point, did you have aspirations to start your own business at that point? Was that a goal?
Yes and no. So I graduated, I worked for 6 years in the States and then the UK. And then when I come back to Brazil, so my family has a business in textiles. And so in a way, my operating system had the entrepreneurial setting to it. So that was in there, even though I never really gave it much thought. And I come home and I interview with a lot of the big search firms. And, they do a lot of great things. But I didn't really feel like I fit in. So, I wasn't married yet. I didn't have kids yet, saved up a little bit of money. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to try this entrepreneurial thing out. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. It's just me. So I set up shop and, 10 years later, here we are. But to be honest with you, I started the firm because I wanted a job. I needed a job that I liked. And then there's a second part to it where, I wanted to work with people I consider friends. And one of the perks of owning a business is that you have say over whom you hire. So you don't have to hire any, I don't know, Ken, can we say any swear words on this podcast?
You are more than welcome to.
You can kind of fill in the blanks for me, but I don't need to work with any, bleep.
Yeah, exactly right. No, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think that's one. And I think honestly, even beyond just our own firm, I think that's one of the lessons that I try to impart on candidates also, is that, yes, there's a paycheck involved, there's a title, there's a breadth of responsibility in the role that you're considering. But, I'll use the word that you didn't use. You don't want to work with assholes. It doesn't make any sense, right? Life is too short. Work is hard enough when you enjoy it. But when you have the added pressure or discomfort or uneasiness of working with people that are just jerks, right? They're self-serving. They're all about themselves. They take credit for all the good stuff and they point the finger and blame everybody else when something goes sideways. It's just not worth it, right? One of the things I talk about in my book is when I did a lot of coaching back in the big financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, and I would talk to senior executives and try to help them with their job search. And I'd say, what do you want to do? And they'd give me this long list of things that they had done. And I said, yeah, but what do you want to do going forward? And they would stop and they would pause and say, wow, I never thought about that. So they had their career had almost kind of happened to them. They didn't feel at
Mhm.
that point, for whatever reason, that they could have much control or direct their own career. So that's been a really big takeaway for me is, you are in control of your destiny. Whether or not you're going to start your own company, whether or not you're going to manage a team, it doesn't matter. You can be a warehouse worker, you can be a FedEx driver, it doesn't matter. But just know that you are in control of your career. Don't let it happen to you. Make sure what happens is what you want.
I think that what you do is important, but the with whom you do it might be more important on a daily happiness satisfaction level.
I agree. I agree completely. And I would imagine that, with the growth that you've had out there and the team that you have, a big reason why they're coming to work for you is what you just described. They want to work with somebody and be led by somebody who has that philosophy of life and who's doing things for the right reason and is going to take care of their team and is going to think about diversity and all the other things that are out there. It's really important. So, again, I commend you for building that kind of firm.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
It's been good fun.
So we're talking here in early 2023. There is, after several years of just nonstop growth, post pandemic, now we're in a bit of a slowdown, especially in the tech space. So where does that take you from here? Do you think about diversifying? Do you think about going outside of your tech expertise to other industries that might be thriving? Or how does a quote unquote downturn like this affect, your focus going forward?
So when you're running a firm for 10 years, you get, in a weird way, you get used to the fact that it's cyclical and that you're going to have years of high intensity and high growth. And you're going to have years that are a lot more challenging from a business development perspective, right? We've carved out a great place for ourselves in the like the tech niche within executive search, which I'm very proud of. But the real opportunity, the real niche I want to carve out for our firm is within diversity. So with affirmative action searches, I think that's where we can not only make a difference for our clients and candidates, but I think that's where you start to really impact society overall as well. So we're investing heavily on that front, and it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun.
Are you? What's the level of receptivity among your clients for that focus? Is it, in other words, are you having to really educate companies and your clients about why affirmative action and diversity is important, or do they already understand it, but they just don't have any place to go to find that kind of talent?
I mean, our audience is a little bit easier because we're dealing with tech companies who are very receptive or have that maybe very ingrained from the onset, right? And it's just a matter of finding the right expertise, the right partner to help them access senior level talent that is also diverse. So it's, thankfully, I've never come across somebody that, sits down and goes, oh, I don't like this. I don't believe in this. I probably just say thank you, stand up and leave. So it's been very receptive. But I think that there is still a lot of, we're in the early days. So, a lot of it's not good enough just to hire diverse talent. I think before that, you also have to really prepare the ground so that when this talent comes in, they're well received and they're in a place where they can really make a difference and flourish. So it's not only about the hiring part. I think a lot of it is about the early days as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you can't just hire one diversity candidate into your organization, quote unquote, check that box and expect that person to thrive or feel comfortable, right? It's just not how it works. And the same holds for anybody else, whatever that other population happens to be. You've got to build that structure around it, and you've got to be supportive across the board and be aware of it. And the onboarding and the mentoring and the training and learning and development, all those pieces have to support that kind of that underlying, thread, if you will, or theme of diversity is important. And I agree with you completely.
The impact, I think, on the organization is immediate, right? So, in search, right, we have a lot of these. The client will tell us, "Look, I would really like somebody from a top tier school," and then within the leadership team, you manage placing a candidate who, of diversity or not, but might not be from a top tier school, and this person performs great, and all of a sudden, that myth is deconstructed. right? So there's a lot of transformation that can be done simply by placing great people at the right spot. And then you in a way, you restructure slash re-educate a lot of these biases and misconceptions.
Yeah,
The ideal candidate comes from a top program with a great MBA and spent 2 to 4 years in management consulting, blah, blah, blah. And then, you play somebody that is not that. And all of a sudden that illusion, that idea starts to dissipate. So I think that this is really where I believe my team and I can make a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people don't realize that question or that request to have somebody from a top tier school, that eliminates a lot of minorities. If you just look at the demographics out there, it's just a reality, right? Or when people write, companies write job descriptions with very, kind of male dominated language. We want somebody who's aggressive, who's a hunter, who's bold, who's direct, all those things. And all the research shows that, female candidates tend to shy away from applying to those kinds of roles. Right. Exactly. Right. Because they look at it and they say, oh, that's not me. Right. And so, yeah. So to your point, changing that narrative and showcasing the fact that, you can hire somebody who's not from a top tier school, who's going to still do a phenomenal job. And then all of a sudden it just opens up the floodgates and they are now open to that, across the board, which is great. So to your point from earlier,
so the next generation of job descriptions, you no longer have that awkward sentence of like must come from a top tier school.
Exactly.
Or in our case in Brazil is like must speak fluent English. Is that really necessary for the job at hand? Because if it's not, then you're eliminating a great part of the talent pool because of that phrase.
Yeah, and the same can be said for college degrees in general. I know, obviously pre-COVID in the U.S., it was more difficult to bring somebody into a leadership role without a traditional 4-year degree, right? But because of the war for talent in the last several years have shown how different it is, and honestly, the changing tide, right, in terms of whether or not there's the same value in a 4-year college degree that there was 20 years ago, that's changed up completely. I remember when I got into recruiting 26 years ago, if you didn't have a 4-year degree from a traditional physical campus university, you were considered a second-class citizen. And the same thing when it came to moving around. If you changed jobs more often than every 8 to 10 years, right, then you were considered a job hopper, back in the late 90s. Nowadays, as long as you're in the job for at least 18 months, all right, we understand, right? And if you don't have a college degree, all right, as long as you have the experience, the commensurate experience to make up for that, then that's fine. So it's taken a while, to your point, it takes a while for those job descriptions to change, but I am starting to see that shift without a doubt. So obviously, so your kids are a little bit older now. You've got a boy and a girl. What are some of the things that you are doing to keep yourself balanced outside of work, whether it's boom times or difficult times? What are some of those diversions, distractions, that you're doing these days?
So 5 years ago, I started playing tennis. It's been mostly a blessing. You're outdoors a lot, which is nice, but I like how it's like chess movement. Andrew Agassi has a great way of describing the game. He says that, you have an adversary and your adversary is a lock and you're trying to pick that lock. So I like that it's physical, but it's also like very, very mental. And then, that helps a lot, but also you have your guilty pleasures. I don't think my kids will listen to this podcast, so I can say it here, but I steal their Legos all the time. I just really enjoy, getting lost, building those little plastic bricks. So it's,
I love that. That's one of the things I miss about my kids are now 21 and 25, right? So, but I miss having all the toys, the Legos, the figurines, all that stuff around the house, the way that I did in the past. But I mean, and there are consulting firms around the world that use Legos as a way to, foster creativity, right? And, design thinking and just to break through, an impasse, if you will, because to your point, there is a lot of creativity there and building blocks and not having to build it to a specific end goal. Following directions and building whatever it is one thing, but just the art of taking a bunch of pieces and putting them together and see what comes out of it. There's a lot of freeing up of your mindset when you do something like that. So I love that idea.
Yeah. And in our jobs, they're very intellectual and they're very fast paced, but one thing that they're not is manual. And, I think a lot of this has come from kind of, being half Buddhist, let's say. Manual is great. Manual is good. And just sitting there and, building things with your hands is just very empowering. And it's very relaxing and it's very gentle at the same time. So, I think manual labor is something that, in the West, we tend to look down upon. We think it's maybe the person doesn't have as much education as we have, therefore that's the kind of jobs available. But the act of doing, of making something, it's just very special.
Yeah, as we are talking now, you can't see it behind me, but I actually have a banjo here in my office. I have always loved to play the banjo. And to your point, it's just a way to pick that up for half an hour a day and just create something. I don't play very well. I'm just learning on my own, right? But it's just taking me away from the very inquisitive nature of what we do, as we talked about before, asking a lot of questions, and a lot of decisions have to be made when you're running a business. But when you just pick up an instrument or pick up Legos, whatever it might be, and you break away from that, even for 30 minutes a day, I find it to be very freeing also. And I come back feeling much more refreshed after I've done that. So I'm 100% in line with what you're talking about, definitely. So let me ask you this. So if you were to go back and talk to yourself from 10 years ago, knowing what you now know, what is there any different advice or ideas or thoughts that you might share with yourself as you were just, starting Vertigo 10 years ago?
I think, it ends up being, there's a reason cliches exist, right? But I think that, when you're in your 20s, early 30s, you take yourself very seriously. And you take everything you do extremely seriously. I tell my team at Vertical all the time, what we do is important, but no one dies and no one goes to jail. So don't take yourself too seriously. Don't think, don't walk around with that big ego, because it's not true. So I think that I could have done a lot of things in a lighter, happier fashion rather than carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. So I think that's kind of the main thing. But it is one of those things to where people did tell me that, but I just wasn't ready to absorb it. So I would probably tell myself that, but I don't know if I would have listened to myself.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, it's one thing to tell yourself something. The other piece is, would your 10 year ago self listen to that? That's a really good point. And my wife is a marriage and family therapist. And as you can imagine, the things that she deals with, that she's helping her clients get through different situations, it's a lot. It's an awful lot. And she's amazing at compartmentalizing and being able to do that very, very well with her clients, but then to put it away when it's time, to end the workday. And to your point, what I do seems so much easier, on the recruiting side compared to that. I mean, because she really is having an impact on these folks' lives during very difficult times. So you're right. It's not rocket science. Nobody is going to die if we don't recruit the right way. Right. So we're very fortunate from that perspective. But I also remember that I had a mentor once years ago when I worked at Heidrick and Struggles. And he said, Ken, we are in the business of changing people's lives, which I've always thought was very, very relevant and a great way to summarize the search business for sure. It's just, we're here to help people, whether it's better title, more compensation, a shorter work commute, whatever it might be. But we're here to help change people's lives, hopefully for the better, right?
No, I think that's right. And I'd go beyond that. I think that if done the right way with a certain amount of purpose, we can impact entire companies, that impact entire societies. So I think that it's a very noble job, and we're very privileged to be in this profession.
For sure. Yeah, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, plus I'm no longer employable by somebody else anyway. I've been on my own too long anyhow, but I definitely love being on my own for sure. So if you're, let's kind of fast forward. We'll kind of wrap this up with this question or this conversation. But so we talked about what you would tell yourself from 10 years ago. What do you hope that you learn or that you develop or that you experience in the next 10 years? So if we're sitting down and you're in your early 50s, like where I am now, right? A few years down the road, what do you hope you're talking about at that point that you've accomplished?
I think that the themes tend to be the same, right? Be grateful, be curious, keep going that way. I hope that the 50-year-old version of me will tell the 40-year-old version of me and actually listen and take that in. But I would like to take the next 10 years just happier and lighter and, with more gratitude and taking more things with a smile on my face rather than with the high intensity that, I don't know. We always think that to do something well, you have to do it like with an angry, intense face. Let's try it with a smile for the next 10 years.
I love that. That should be the next title of your book, right? It should be, try it with a smile. I love that.
It's like try it with a smile by the Catholic and Buddhist, right?
Exactly right. Exactly. There you go. Right. It's like the book by Tony Hsieh, right? Who was the late founder of Zappos. Delivering happiness. That's what it's all about, right? It is, you are delivering a product or a service, but at the end of the day, you're delivering an experience, right? No matter what that product or service happens to be, and happiness has to be part of that experience for your customers, or they're not going to come back and they're not going to, talk, positively about you online, on the internet, and they're not going to tell their friends about you. So that happiness, whether it's you as the leader or your customers, the happiness has to be part of that formula. Otherwise, you're doomed to fail. Any last parting words or advice that you might give to other aspiring entrepreneurs out there, no matter what business they might be thinking about? But if you're talking to a class of 10-year-olds the way that you were spoken to when you were 10, any thoughts or advice you might give to them?
I think that it's changed so much. I talk about this with my wife quite a bit. Is are our kids even going to go to college? And if so, are they going to have one job at a time like we do? So I think that it's, from a job perspective, we're going through something really interesting. It's going to be a fundamental shift. And as you know, most jobs that are going to be in demand 10 years from now probably don't even exist today. So I'm just really curious to see what happens next. But I think that you have to become a lifelong learner, right? You have to take the good, learn from it, but the bad is also a great opportunity to learn. And, we were talking about this earlier. You asked me about the unicorn, right? What's a unicorn? A company that's reached $1 billion US in valuation. And one year, my team asked me, we work with a lot of the unicorns here at Vertical. Is our ambition to become a unicorn? And I kind of laughed it off, right? I said, no, I don't know. I don't want to be the biggest search firm in the world. I don't even want to be the best search firm in the world. I do want to be the last search firm in the world. So if you want to be the last, you have to be flexible and you have to be resilient and all that. That's a crocodile. It's not a unicorn, because the crocodile was around when the dinosaurs were around. It continues to be around today, scaring a lot of people in South Florida. So that's, I think I very much like to be a crocodile. So I think the message is, don't take it as a sprint. Like, it's really, all of this is really a marathon, right? You're going to have ups and downs. So don't, if you get something wrong, that's okay. You have another chance to kind of make it right. And just do the right things and do them long term. I think that's the main thing I probably try to tell 10-year-olds, even though, the younger you are, the more immediate you are. So don't know how much of that they're gonna take.
Do the right thing and do it long term. I love that. That's perfect. That's a great way to sum things up. And as a parent talking to you, I know our listeners can't see you, but just seeing the energy and the excitement and the happiness on your face, there's a lot of smiling going on. So that's great. You're already on.
Yeah, it's from the heart. It's from the heart.
You're already on your way to making that a good positive, focus in the next 10 years for sure. So, well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing all this and being willing to be vulnerable and talk to us about what's going on, both on the family side, but also business and where things go from here. There's an awful lot happening out there. I keep saying it's a really interesting time to be in the people business. And I think there's a lot of trends that are coming up now that will take hold and be the norm 10 years from now. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds.
Thanks for having me, Ken. It was fun and different being on the other side of the table, not being the one asking the questions. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. Great seeing you.
Yeah, you too. Take care.